The enmity that lay between the dwarfs and orcs led to many great battles and wars, as their hatred for each other grew, and the greatest of these wars was started by Azog, culminating in the Battle of Azanulbizar, also known as the Battle of Moria. Hey guys, it's Carl here, and in today's episode, we'll be exploring the history of Azog and the series of events that took place during this war. So in the year 1981 of the Third Age, the Dwarfs of Moria disturbed an ancient evil that had buried itself in the deep parts of the mountain, a Balrog of Morgoth. With no hope of defeating this fearsome demon, the Dwarfs of Khazad-dûm had no choice but to abandon their kingdom, and their halls would lie empty and lifeless for over 400 years. Unfortunately, its next inhabitants would not be dwarfs but orcs that had been sent there by Sauron in the year 2480, and it's very likely that Azog was one of these orcs, or a descendant of theirs. Now these orcs slowly spread throughout the Misty Mountains, where they established many strongholds and colonies, and even though the orcs now ruled the kingdom of Khazad-dûm, the dwarfs had not given up hope that they would reclaim it one day. They had not forgotten the stories of their forefathers, of the splendor and greatness of Khazad-dûm, and they yearned to return and reclaim its halls. This thought and hope was most prominent in the mind of their exiled king called KingThror, and it slowly ate away at his sanity until he could resist its call no longer, and it's very likely that Thror's dwarven ring of power played a part in this rash decision, fueling his desire for the riches and treasures of Moria. And so, in the year 2790, Thror would finally give in to his foolish desires, and he set off towards Moria with a single companion named Nar. I don't think that Thror was aware that orcs had now taken over his kingdom, and when they arrived at Moria's eastern gate, they found its doors wide open, and Thror proudly ventured into the darkness of Khazad-dûm as a king returning to his birthright. Yet something stopped Nar from following his king, a sense of uneasiness and fear, and he begged Thror not to go past its gates, though there was no stopping him now, not when he was this close to his kingdom. Nar refused to abandon his king, and he hid outside for many days, hoping and waiting for Thror's return, though his hope was in vain, for Thror had been captured by Azog as he wandered the halls of Moria, and Azog beheaded him and branded his name upon the dwarf's head. Thror's body and head were dragged and thrown out of the eastern gate of Moria, and Azog was somehow aware of Nar's presence outside, and he chose to spare him so that Nar could deliver a message to the dwarfs on Azog's behalf, proclaiming that Azog was now the king of Moria, and any dwarf that dared to cross into his kingdom would only find their death. Azog then flung a small bag of coins towards Nar as payment, to mock him for providing this service, and he forbid him from recovering Thror's body. It was clear to Nar that there was no hope of retrieving his king's remains, and so he picked up the bag of coins and fled, and in his final glimpse of Moria, he saw Azog and the orcs butchering and hacking Thror's body to pieces as they fed his king to the crows nearby. Now it was never wise to anger the dwarven people, for they were proud and their fury burned hot, and they did not forgive easily, and when Thror's son called Thrain learned how Azog killed and desecrated the body of his father, he sent out messengers to all the different dwarven houses, summoning them to unite under one banner. It was unacceptable that a descendant of Durin the Deathless was killed and dishonored in such a manner, and after 3 long years, the dwarven army was ready and assembled, hungry for vengeance. Many notable dwarfs would form part of this army, such as Thrain's 2 sons called Thorin and Frerin, along with Balin, Dwalin and Gloin, and most of their battles with the orcs would take place in deep caverns beneath the earth, as they marched through the caves of the Misty Mountains, sacking all the orc strongholds and cities that they could find, searching relentlessly for Azog. One by one, these orc settlements fell, for the orcs were outclassed by the superior armor and weaponry of the dwarfs, and they couldn't match their fury and anger in battle, until all the surviving orcs gathered in Moria under Azog's command, ready to make a final stand. Azog ordered his men to assemble outside of Moria's eastern gate and upon the slopes of the mountain to take advantage of the high ground, and there were so many orcs under his command that they now outnumbered the dwarven forces. To make matters worse, even the weather favored the orc army, for this battle took place on a dark wintry day with no sunlight, and so the orcs were at their strongest. Despite the fact that this battle was clearly in his favor, Azog seemed to be afraid to face the dwarven army, for he chose to hide and wait inside of the safety of Moria while his warriors fought on his behalf. Now King Thrain decided that he would lead the dwarven vanguard, which included his 2 sons along with Balin and Dwalin, and they charged into the orc forces, though the orcs managed to repel them while inflicting many casualties upon the dwarves, and they drove them back into a nearby forest that grew close to the lake of Keled Saram. The situation looked dire for Thrain's company, who were now cut off from the main dwarven force, and to make matters worse, the orcs had followed them into the woods, and a great battle took place there. Thrain would witness the death of his youngest son, Frerin, as he was butchered by orcs, and Balin and Dwalin would also lose their father Fundin in these woods. Very few dwarfs would escape unscathed from this battle, and even Thrain would suffer significant injuries, for an orc managed to injure Thrain's leg and blind him in one eye. Yet not all was grim, and during the skirmish, some legendary deeds were also wrought, for at some point during this battle, an orc clove through Thorin's shield, and he resorted to using a nearby oak branch to block the incoming blows of his foes, earning him the name Thorin Oakenshield. After that day, Thorin vowed to keep a shield made of oak wood until he was hailed as king. While Thrain and his forces were separated in the woods from the main dwarven army, the other dwarfs were fighting a fierce battle on the main front, which was held in a fine balance, though it would finally shift in the dwarfs' favor when their kinsmen from the Iron Hills arrived as reinforcements, led by their lord called Nain. These dwarfs were still fresh for battle, and they managed to drive back the orcs to the very threshold of Moria, slaying the armies of Azog as they cried out for him. Nain even went so far as to taunt Azog, asking him if the battle was too rough for him to handle, and such a taunt could not be ignored, and Azog would finally emerge from the darkness of Moria, surrounded by his bodyguard. His stamina and strength were undiminished, since he had stayed behind in Moria while the battle raged on, and he rushed towards Nain and his company. Nain was half blinded by rage as he fought Azog, and the fatigue of battle had started to weaken him, and in a last desperate attack, he gathered all of his remaining strength to unleash a great blow towards Azog, which would have surely been a lethal blow had it reached its mark, though Azog was too strong and agile, and he managed to dodge it. This attack left Nain exposed, and Azog kicked out at him, causing him to stumble, and with one swift stroke, Azog brought down his weapon upon Nain's neck, breaking it and slaying him. Azog was now responsible for the death of 2 great dwarven lords, and he relished this small victory, though it soon became clear to him that the battle was lost. All around him lay the dead bodies of his bodyguards, and his orc army was defeated, fleeing in many directions as they were cut down by the dwarves. With no hope for victory, Azog turned to return back into the safety of Moria, though before he could reach its gates, a dwarf sprinted up the stairs and leapt towards him, wielding a mighty red axe. This was Dain Ninefoot, the son of Nain, and even though he was barely an adult by dwarven standards, he was filled with an uncontrollable wrath after witnessing the death of his father, and he managed to slay and behead Azog. In a twisted form of irony, the dwarf stuffed the coin purse that Azog had thrown towards Nar into Azog's mouth, and they set his head upon a stake. They also searched Azog's body for the dwarven ring of power, for they thought that it was still in Thror's possession when he entered Moria, though he had in fact given it to his son in secret before departing on this perilous journey. Now when Dain stood near the eastern gate of Moria, he looked into the ancient halls of his people, and in the distance he caught a glimpse of Durin's bane. The sight of the Balrog filled his heart with fear, and when he descended, he informed Thrain that they would not be able to reclaim Moria while the Balrog yet lived, which was a great disappointment for Thorin, for he had hoped that this victory would free the dwarves from their wandering fate and allow them to secure their ancient home of Khazad-dûm. This was the end of the Battle of Azanulbizar, and despite their victory, the dwarves didn't sing or celebrate, for they had lost almost half their forces and many of them were injured, and they still had the grim task of stripping their dead of their weapons and armor to prevent the orcs from looting their corpses. The fallen dwarfs were burnt upon pyres, using the wood from the nearby forest, and after all their kinsmen were laid to rest, the dwarven forces went their separate ways. Dain would lead his father's people back to the Iron Hills, while Thrain and Thorin returned to Dunland for a while, until they eventually established a new home in exile in the eastern parts of the Blue Mountains. Though he was slain, Azog's legacy would live on through his son Bolg, who would terrorize the dwarves and the free people in the Battle of the Five Armies, though that is a story for another time. Anyway friends, this wraps up today's video and I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Azog and on the war between the dwarves and orcs, so feel free to share them with us in the comments below. Do you think Azog was one of the most infamous orcs in the history of Arda, and would you like to see his story and that of this war portrayed in a series or film? As always, if you're interested, check out our Facebook, Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, Discord, and some of our affiliate links in the video description. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we'll once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.